My name is Sheldon Thomas. I'm a former gang member. I have been running a company called Gangsline for several years now. We started out as a charity, which, we was getting money from the government, but obviously after 2008, that became a very tough thing to do, a big struggle for us to continue to keep getting money from the government because of the austerity. So we decided to form a private limited company, which we will then deliver consultancy and training. And what does this mean? It's quite simple. Various police forces, local authorities, different local districts in the suburbs, whether it be the NHS, whether it be the mental health workers, whether it be youth offending teams or probation, would engage our services for us to consult on what is the best way forward in strategically prioritizing gangs as a priority in their area. And I was trained by the Home Office to do this. So that's the reason why we're able to offer this kind of consultancy role, unlike many others. So we was trained by the Home Office to deliver consultancy. That was done through the peer review. Now, on top of that, we decided also to deliver training. Now, the training that we deliver is very unique because most of the training is done by former gang members. In fact, all of the training is done by former gang members. And we train professionals, whether they be the police, whether it be the NHS staff, youth offending team, probation, school teachers, PRU workers, various different multi-faceted agencies we train, whether they be governmental or non-governmental. We train faith groups, community organizations, and the uniqueness of our training is the fact that we've lived it. And it sounds really strange when you're talking about a lived experience, but it does matter when it comes to delivering training, because if you're going to do a gangs training, you want to understand how gang members think. You cannot go to a training that is delivered by somebody or written by somebody who's never lived it, who's just spent a few hours doing secondary research, and you're going to come away thinking, well, that's a good training session. And yes, maybe in its own rights, for people in certain levels that may be okay. But when we're talking about frontline staff, they need to hear the realness. They need to understand how gang members think and why do they do what they do, and the world that these gang members live in. Because remember, gang members don't live in our world. They run and live in a parallel world that runs along our world, And you've got to understand that it's different, and many people can't offer you that perspective unless they've lived it. So that's what's unique about our training. We also do gangs prevention workshop in schools, where we go into schools, and again, the credibility of having former gang members going into schools is so much better than having somebody standing there who's never lived it and telling people about, oh, you shouldn't join gangs or don't carry a knife. Now, that will work in some primary schools, no doubt about that. But that won't work in the PRUs, colleges and secondary schools, because most of the gang members are in those places. And so you need somebody with credibility that's going to go in there and kind of demist or debunk their thinking, their understanding of what gangs is. And that only can come from somebody that's lived it. Somebody who's seen 9 of his friends gets murdered or kidnapped or tortured, or they themselves was involved in kidnaps or tortures, or the fact of selling drugs and carrying weapons. So to us, our service is very credible in the sense of the training, in the sense of the consultancy, and in the sense of the gangs prevention workshop. So we need to address all of that. Now, let's get onto the subject at hand, which is gangs, or people are talking about the epidemic of knife crime. I don't believe we can talk about knife crime outside of the context of gang culture. I am really shocked that all we want to do is talk about knife crime as if gangs don't exist. The fact that we have young people who may not be in gangs carrying weapons is the fact of the influence of gangs. That's the reason why we're here today. And if successive Home Secretaries had listened when I had approached each one, Jack Straw I approached in 2001, Charles Clark I approached in 2005, John Reed I approached in 2007, and all three of them said we didn't have a gangs problem. All three of them didn't understand when I was talking about how children are going to be used further down the line to do things like carry weapons and sell drugs. They didn't understand it. Why? Because most of these Home Secretaries or these government staff or people of influence in the government only understand if somebody from a, who has a PhD, who's done some sort of research. They only respect those kind of people. They don't respect people who have lived it in the way they ought to, because for them it's about evidence base. Now that's the problem we have. Add these successive Home Secretaries under Labour, and obviously under Labour, had listened and not looked at whether a person's qualified or whether a person has a PhD, and looked at understanding the qualitative understanding of what we're talking about, then maybe we might not have been in this position, because some of the stuff that we were telling them to do, they're now trying to do now, which you can't do because gangs is cemented and it's part of British fabric. The fabric of this society is made up of gang culture. So that's part of why we're in this mess. We have government, MOPAC, Home Office, listening to people who have never lived it. And I'm going to give you an example. Would you go and get a flu jab from somebody that empties the bin? That means, the dustman that comes and collects your rubbish. The answer is no. So why are you listening to people who have never lived it around giving you strategic advice, trying to train you to understand something they clearly have never lived? But we do it all the time. And the reason why is because of the systems we have in place. And those systems stops us from thinking outside of the box. So that's the reason why we're here today talking about knife crime as if it's not part of gang culture, which it is. Now, when we look at the knife crime today in terms of the surge in violence and murders, everybody's asking, what can we do to fix this problem? Well, you can't, because you're not looking at the root causes here. We're just looking at the symptoms. Oh, this young person stabbed that person, this one shot that person, this one done this. What we have to look at is where these young people are coming from. These young people are coming from homes where, in some of these homes, their mothers have grown up in the same way they have. No father figure, maybe no love from mum. Mum was struggling herself. So she reenacts what she was taught. And if you wasn't taught to love your child, or you wasn't loved yourself, it's going to be difficult for you to dish out love. And according to the attachment theory, which is clear, if we as adults do not deal with the issues in our own lives, it's likely that your issues will be passed down to your child. And that means what it's trying to say, according to the attachment theory, it's saying that when we don't deal with our issues as adults, our child will come out in the same way, because the cycle has never been broken. But we don't talk about that. We want to talk about young people carrying knives, but it goes further back than that, because we have to understand every young person comes out of a home. And in order to address it, you can't address it by parachuting in with interventions, very quick, trying to find quick results to a problem that is over 30 years old. Because when I was in a gang 30 years ago, we were shooting each other. And nothing was dealt with then, because no one understood that the problem in certain communities was happening, or they didn't want to know because it was only happening to a small minority. And what we have to understand is that you cannot fix a problem in a community that refuses to address they have a problem. Because at the moment, we have communities up and down, whether they be poor white communities, whether they be the black communities. They don't take responsibility. What they do is look for blame. And many of these adults in these communities always are looking to blame someone. I mean, one of the things we've heard is about youth clubs. And I laugh at the idea of youth clubs. How on earth can a youth club stop gang violence or stop serious youth violence or knife crime when most gang members have never and never would go to a youth club? Now, youth club would only work for small children, young kids from the age of 10 years old. Yes, that would work. But let's have a look at what I have seen from the work that we do at Gangsline. We go up and down this country and have done for many years. And what we have found is that when we go into certain estates, we find children who are supposed to be in their bed by 7 are out at night till 1 o'clock in the morning. Children as young as 10, 11, 12, 13. These children should not be out on a school day or on a weekend out at 1 o'clock in the morning. Because my question to the world or to the UK is, who do you blame for that? Surely you're not telling me you're going to blame the police. Surely you're not telling me you're going to blame the government. At what point do we put that blame, or do we put this back onto irresponsible parents? If your child is out till 1 o'clock in the morning with older kids, you don't need to have a PhD to work out that it won't be long before that young child is going to be influenced by those older guys. It's not, you don't need a PhD for that. So the question is, why are we not putting this back into the community to say, actually, what are you doing to stop the knife crime or the gangs in your area? Because if we don't take no responsibility as parents, I want to know who does. Because I've never heard of a government taking responsibility for a child that they didn't conceive. So the question is that we've got to change how we deal with this strategy. We can't keep saying that this is the government and this is the police. We have to, at some point, as a community, have to take responsibility for the actions of our children. We've got children going into schools right now, threatening school teachers. I had one school teacher in Manchester who was told that his gang is going to come to get him after school because the teacher told him to stop making noise in his class. That teacher had to leave the school. So what society are we becoming where we have children that are threatening teachers in school, and we are more concerned about interventions than the worry of how did that child get into a position of threatening a teacher's life, that he's going to kill him or his gang's going to get him? How do we get to that point? So we have to go back to the root causes. And I'm really sorry, but most of these young kids involved in this lifestyle, they have absent fathers. Now I know many of you don't want to talk about absent fathers. Unfortunately, that's the facts. When you look at the statistics of the young kids arrested and the young kids that have died, they have absent fathers in their life. If you look at the schools today and the percentage of children that are going to school, almost 2 in 5 children have no fathers in their homes. Now, some people are going to say, what has that got to do with the surge in knife crime? It's got lots to do with it. Rejection is one of the biggest problems we have with children who feel rejected. That is actually in the attachment theory. When children feel rejected, when children don't form that attachment to their guardian, to their parent, that emotional attachment that is needed for children's growth. Now, I talk a lot about attachment theory because I believe that poverty has got nothing to do with crime. People think just because you're poor, you're ultimately going to commit a crime. Well, let me assure you of this. There are so much families in this country who are poor, who have never committed one crime. Not one. So we have to look at what is it about this group of young people or this group of families that are committing crimes? And what you will find that there is a correlation is that there is a correlation of family breakdown. Now, how does that affect middle class whites? Because now, because of the culture and the music that is involved in the pushing of this gangster lifestyle, we've got white middle class kids who are also involved in this lifestyle. And why? Because the music that is made by many of the young men, and I'm going to be honest with you, 95% of the music that is made, which is trap and drill, is made by black young guys. I'm not going to lie about that. That's the truth. But the audience is mainly white kids. So when you will go into areas like Croxteth, Norris Green, which is in Liverpool, or Essex down in just outside of London, or Milton Keynes, and you will hear white kids who talk black, who act black, and think they're black because of the music they're listening to. And no one is even thinking, actually, this music is the part of the reason we're in this condition, because the music is spreading the culture of gangs. It's spreading the culture of you need to carry a weapon. You need to disrespect girls. You need to sell drugs. You need to have Gucci, Ralph Lauren, wear jewelry. It's giving them this impression that you can get everything you want now and get that respect. So we're up against the social media, who are now the parents of these young kids. Why? Because most parents, on average in Britain, spend less than 15 hours a week with their children. And when I say spend less than 15 hours, I'm actually saying that we spend more time at work than we do with our kids. So the gang members can easily influence our children, or radicalised Muslims, or far-right groups by using social media sites. Why? Because near enough, most children from the age of 10 has a mobile phone, which has internet access. Most kids spend between 40 to 50 hours a week on their mobile phones in their rooms while we sit downstairs. Most parents do not know the passwords of their kids' phone, of their kids' social sites. Most parents don't interact with their kids to find out what they're doing on the social sites. So when the policeman knocks at the door and say, your son's either been stabbed or shot, or your son's been arrested for stabbing or shooting somebody, most parents are acting shocked because they actually didn't know their children. And that's part of the reason why we're in this. Most parents don't actually know their children. They actually don't know their children's friends. They actually don't know what their children get up to on social media sites. So they don't know if they're putting out threats, or they're receiving threats, or they're being bullied, or they're bullying somebody else. This problem here of knife crime, which I believe is influenced by gangs, cannot be fixed by we keep coming up with different reports that we reckon, and we're hearing those, getting those reports from people who've never lived it, and saying, right, we're going to implement these strategies. Nothing's going to change. And the reason why nothing's going to change is quite simple. We're not addressing the root causes. We're afraid to address absent fathers. We're afraid to look at the mums who are struggling. We're afraid to address the issues of how mothers are left with 2 or 3 kids for 2 different men. We're afraid to address how children will feel when there is no father, and they suddenly feel that sense of rejection, but they don't know how to deal with it. We don't look at the psychological issues of anger, loneliness, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, or personality. Most children involved in this lifestyle have many of those issues. Now, I know we're looking at a health approach. I understand that, and that's really good. But the most important thing we're not looking at is a societal approach. And if we don't address this problem from a societal point of view, we're not going to change anything. And unfortunately, that's the world we've become. We like to find a quick fix answer to a long-term systemic problem, and that can't work. We cannot continue like that. The problem of knife crime, gang violence, is being spread using the YouTube. The problem is not about government or police, even though they do have to do their part. That means they have to have a vision for children. They have to have a good education system that works. They have to be able to offer kids jobs, not at £3.79 an hour, but more at £10 an hour. We need to look at how children's have changed. Children don't want to work in a 9 to 5. They want to create their own businesses. They want to become entrepreneurs. What are we doing to enable that? Look at the construction site. To be a bricklayer now, today, you can earn £400 a day. We don't promote that service. We don't promote construction in school. Why? Because we want to wait for them to go to college. We've got to understand not every child wants to go to university. And what we've got to understand, the ones who drop out or get kicked out of school, maybe those are the ones that you need to find a vocation for. You need to find a different strategy around getting them involved. Maybe not back into school, but back into something that's going to make them feel like they're going somewhere. Because at the moment, we're losing these young people to gangs. We're losing them to radicalized Muslims. We're losing them to far-right groups because we are not understanding things have changed in British society. We are not the parents. The social media's become the parents. And we have to wake up to what our children, the world our children is. The world they're in is not governed by our rules. It's governed by their rules. They have their own court system. They have their own way of dealing with criminals, with each other. They have their own way of dealing with things that they deem that violates their lifestyle. And we need to understand the world they're in. And many adults don't. And this is where Gangsline comes in. We understand their world because we've lived it. That makes a significant difference. But we cannot keep trying to parachute in when communities are not taking the responsibility they need to take as parents. If we're going to continue to be afraid to address the family dynamics, then we're not going to fix the problem as a society.